There's something about the game that just matters to people. It's ingrained in their life, it's ingrained in their childhood. They don't want to lose the connection, they want to pass it on.
Baseball is the great connective tissue. Baseball is the engine of our personal reminiscence.
You want to understand the heart and the mind of America, you know, you have to understand baseball.
There are people who have never been to a Major League Baseball game, who don't watch it on TV, who do not follow it. And little do they realize, they actually understand the force-out rule.
Baseball is America's game. Seemingly every chapter in its long history chronicled in great detail. Yet few, if any Americans, really know how the sport began. Invented or evolved. Through the years, very little's been known about baseball's true origins. Yet because the desire to find our way home persists, baseball's birth story is finally coming to light.
We all, one way or another, want to know where we came from. Sometimes more seriously, why.
There's a certain satisfaction in understanding how something as important and popular as American baseball came to be.
The better you understand the early history of any endeavor, in this case baseball, the better we can understand how it evolved. Knowing where it came from helps us understand where it's going.
I think baseball, when it was new, was a living, evolving organism.
People like to think of baseball as this thing that's been around forever, but baseball is constantly changing.
The rules were changing dramatically, almost year by year from 1845 on. Some of the things that we think of as principal, fundamental elements of the game were in fact in flux.
While baseball is often imagined as a rural game, the truth is during the 19th century, baseball really grew and organized in the cities. Baseball clubs sprung up in industrial areas throughout the country, each playing its own brand of ball. In 1845, a New York club, the Knickerbockers, gained a place in baseball's early history when its founding members wrote down the rules to the game.
Clearly there were organized ball clubs before the Knickerbockers. We just don't have any surviving copies of their rules.
Uncovering baseball's past is the mission of author David Block.
I looked at the existing baseball histories and discovered that in their opening chapter, where they had some obligatory paragraphs about baseball's beginnings, there really wasn't very much of substance there. And for the most part, there was no factual evidence to support these stories about baseball's beginnings.
It's led Block to these startling conclusions. Baseball is truly a British import, and before the Brits played baseball, they were playing other bat and ball games that helped develop baseball. In fact, Block's research contradicts most of what we've been told about the origins of the game during the last century, meaning that for a long time, we've been thrown a curveball.
You've been a fan for 50 years?
Since before your father was born.
Say, will you tell us all about it when we get home, Gran? You know, how it started and all the rest.
Oh, you're asking too much of your grandfather. But I can show you a book that will tell you all about baseball.
Baseball stories are handed down from person to person, generation to generation, and they're often unquestioned. A big one would be the Doubleday myth.
There's something that is simpler and more satisfying about having an inventor or a creator rather than an evolutionary explanation. Evolution is very imprecise. It's vague. You don't really know when it began.
Long before the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum was built in Cooperstown, New York, baseball was considered America's pastime. During the second half of the 1800s, the sport grew in popularity thanks in part to a sports writer named Henry Chadwick. Chadwick, born in England and raised on cricket, began covering baseball in the 1850s. By the turn of the century, he was the sport's biggest booster, shaping much of the public perception about the game through his books and articles. He was also employed by sporting goods magnate Albert G. Spalding. editing the Spalding Annual Baseball Guide. When Spalding was asked to give a lecture on the origins of baseball, he turned to Chadwick for his opinion.
And his theory had been that baseball evolved from an English game that he called rounders. A.G. Spalding, as he looked further into this, was somewhat offended by that, actually, because he felt that baseball really needed to have an American dad.
It worked to his benefit for it to be an American game because he was selling this product, and mostly to American people, the baseball equipment, and it would make sense to give himself more leverage by saying this is an all-American game invented by Americans.
It was sort of a friendly rivalry that they had for a while there, where Chadwick would insist that baseball was English in origin, whereas Spalding was saying, no, it's American.
Baseball was the national pastime. It was a very important part of being American. America was really coming onto the world stage at that time, and it was very important for the United States to differentiate itself from its roots, specifically Great Britain.
I guess at some point Spalding just decided he'd had enough with that, and that's when he convened this commission to take evidence and try to decide once and for all whether baseball was American or English in origin.
Well, the commission that A.G. Spalding put together, that we call the Mills Commission, in short, I would say it was rigged. As they said after the 1919 Black Sox scandal, the fix was in.
The Mills Commission sent out requests across the country for anybody who had information on the origin of the game to send it to Albert Spalding's office.
And one of the people who saw this notice in a newspaper was a man named Abner Graves.
But I tell you, Graves, I know it will be a good game.
I remember Weld Abner Doubleday explaining baseball to a lot of us that were playing marbles in the street in front of Cooper's tailor shop and drawing a diagram in the dirt with a stick by marking out a square with a punch mark at each corner for bases and a ring in the center for the pitcher.
Well, in this 66-page report, they gave all sorts of evidence from various people that they contacted, and 1.5 pages was devoted to Henry Chadwick's theory, and Henry Chadwick himself actually wrote that. By that time, he was quite an old man. He was only a couple of years away from his death, and really did a pretty poor job of making a good case for himself. But the vast majority of the paperwork was in favor of an American theory, and quite frankly, they really upheld the Abner Doubleday theory.
Abner Doubleday was well known to the American people as a Civil War general who played a prominent role in the Battle of Gettysburg. Albert Spalding was delighted with the finding, and in 1908, the Mills Commission, which happened to be entirely comprised of Spalding's allies, published its report stating that Abner Doubleday invented baseball in Cooperstown in 1839.
He was a Civil War hero, widely known in America at the time, and he was dead at the time, so he couldn't prove or disprove his relationship to baseball's invention.
I myself, after being here a few years, felt that Graves himself probably wasn't lying, but probably witnessed something that he misconstrued later in life.
I just kind of look at the whole Doubleday Cooperstown story the same way I look at Santa Claus. It wouldn't be Christmas without him.
The actual 66-page Mills Commission report didn't come to light until the late 1990s, when it was found in a scrapbook of an estate and donated to the Hall of Fame. Forevermore, it became abundantly clear that Abner Doubleday did not invent baseball. In fact, there's no hard evidence that he ever even played it. On top of that, historical records indicate that Doubleday couldn't have even been in Cooperstown in 1839.
Well, call it, Mr. Umpire. Why, I was going straight for the batter's head. Yet it seemed to go over the plate. Mighty peculiar pitch.
And if the Doubleday theory needed more debunking, we now know that baseball is definitely older than 1839. This 1786 diary entry from a Princeton student is just one of several references discovered in recent years that predate Doubleday's supposed invention of the game, which all makes you wonder, if Cooperstown isn't, as it used to call itself, the birthplace of baseball, then where was the game born? There's a town in Massachusetts that's staking its claim to that title.
I saw my first professional game here in 1965 when I was 7 years old. And to be able to see the Red Sox players that played here over the years, Carlton Fisk, Sparky Lyle, the Coniglieros, was a real special and unique opportunity.
Pittsfield is baseball's Garden of Eden.
Named after the British Prime Minister William Pitt, Pittsfield was first settled in 1752. It's now the largest city in Berkshire County. And in 2004, local officials grabbed national attention by announcing the discovery of a Pittsfield town ordinance banning the play of baseball in 1791.
What happened was that window panes were very expensive at that time, and baseball was often played in the center of town. And as a result of probably a couple of broken window panes, the city fathers at that time came up with an ordinance banning the playing of baseball in that particular area.
And if someone is banning it in 1791, that means they were playing it for a long time before then.
Pittsfield has in mind to challenge Cooperstown as the birthplace of baseball. And to link that with the history of professional baseball here, I think is terrific for the city.
Why do people get so animated about it? You know, if you found an example of a bottle opener from 1642, 100 years earlier than anyone had ever found a bottle opener, who would get so excited about this? Well, finding a really early date for baseball is like finding you have a new relative in your family tree. And he was fantastic, or she was fantastic, did fantastic things, and you never knew anything about them, but now you find that something very odd that you've always found in yourself was back there too.
The discovery of the 1791 document made everyone rethink the origins of the game. There were a few folks who had already been doing that. It's just that until recently, no one in baseball had been paying them much attention. MLB.com and historian David Block traveled across continents to learn more.
Get your drinks now. Get yourselves organized. We are starting the meeting in 7 minutes. Yes, 7 minutes will be the time.
This is the Three Kings pub in the Clerkenwell section of London, and the people mingling are a rare breed on this side of the pond. They're all passionate baseball fans.
What do they do with Carlos Silva? It's one good game, 3 hours.
I know. There's this complete game shutout the other day.
And he'll give up 5 runs.
It's the annual meeting of the United Kingdom chapter of the Society for American Baseball Research, or SABR. It has approximately 7,000 members, but a vast majority of them are based in the States.
Well, SABR UK is one of the few international branches of SABR. I think there's one in Canada and Japan. But unlike Canada and Japan, which are both really heavy baseball countries, being in Britain, I mean, they basically ridicule baseball here.
No one can deny that baseball has international origins. To me, this is symbolized by my favorite food, the hot dog. It was invented by an Englishman for a German clientele in an American ballpark.
There's not an awful lot of baseball discussion in this country.
What you guys need to do is you need to be part of the SABR 19th century history. It has constant dialogues going on about a lot of aspects of it.
I find it very ironic when you watch a cricket team warming up. A lot of the coaches now are wearing baseball gloves.
They noticed the Australians doing it.
They've been pioneers in the study of the origins of baseball in the earliest days of baseball. Long before I was on the scene, or virtually any other American baseball historians were looking into it.
The earliest evidence of baseball being played in England, or being played anywhere for that matter, is a woodcut from the 1744 children's book, A Little Pretty Pocket Book. Other 18th century English references to baseball exist. While they are rare, they are more substantial than the scant evidence of the game being played stateside in the 1700s. Yet few modern-day Brits have much knowledge about America's game.
Only a teeny weeny bit.
DeMario, I think, is the only one that... Is it DeMario? No. No, Babe Ruth, sorry. Babe Ruth is about the only American baseball player that I could give you a name of.
And the one thing that I remember, the quotes from the two guys, who's on first, what's on first or what's on second. There was that film, wasn't there?
I know about Barry Bonds. And I know this isn't an avenue you want to go down because there are controversial elements to Barry Bonds, but we'll leave it like that.
And most Brits still maintain the age-old notion that baseball developed from rounders.
Rounders is a girl sport. You know, it's played in schools. It's a kid's sport. It's taken seriously. I mean, there certainly aren't any professional rounders leagues. And whenever I say, oh yeah, I'm a baseball fan, they go, oh, you mean rounders? Ooh.
But at the debate 100 years ago, Spalding and his cohorts refused to have anything to do with the notion that this brawny, masculine, distinctive American game of baseball could have anything to do with anything from Europe, much less Britain.
It becomes a question of semantics. Baseball devolves from rounders, but at the time that baseball was devolving from rounders, rounders was called baseball. Got it? Good.
It's complicated, but then again, history is rarely as linear and neat as we would like it to be. Bottom line, the earliest known references to a game called baseball came from the 1740s, while the earliest known reference to a game called rounders came from the 1820s, 80 years later. So how could baseball evolve from rounders, as Henry Chadwick had argued in his debate with Albert Spalding? Didn't it have to be the other way around? Rounders came from baseball.
The game that we know in America did start out in Britain. Obviously, being a British colony, these games were imported from Britain to America. It took off in America and then didn't really go very far in Britain.
It wasn't until later in the 18th century there is some evidence of what this game really looked like. And that comes from an unlikely source, a German book published in 1796 that was a compendium of various games and sports. And one of the games included in that book was one called English baseball. It reveals a game that, although smaller in stature and somewhat primitive, nonetheless the obvious forerunner of our modern game of baseball. Pitcher serving the ball to a batter who had 3 attempts to put the ball into play. The batter struck the ball. He had to circumnavigate a circuit of bases and return to home. In this German book is fairly concrete evidence that this 18th century game of baseball that had been played in England was indeed the immediate forerunner of 19th century American baseball, because it would have been too much of a coincidence for the two games to have the same name and to have these same basic elements.
There is more evidence supporting baseball's English roots, especially when you think of baseball as part of a family tree, or maybe more aptly a bramble bush of English bat and ball games that were played either before baseball began or developed concurrently.
These games are actually still being played. That, to me, was sort of a knockdown, mouth drop open type of thing.
Learning that these ancient bat and ball games could be seen in action meant maybe there was more to discover in England about baseball's true origins. And so the crew left the Three Kings pub to find, perhaps, the birthplace of baseball. The first stop was right in London.
The best recent scholarship would indicate that cricket and baseball are cousins or siblings. Certainly they have a common ancestor.
Cricket was the main rival, but also it was the one that developed with baseball as the game that superior athletes to a professional level could play.
Almost through the wicket.
Cricket and baseball were like parents and their teenage kids in one respect, which is that they don't really understand each other very well, and there's not always a great deal of mutual respect.
Ed Smith is one of England's most popular cricket players. He's written a book about the relationship between cricket and baseball. He's even taken batting practice with the New York Mets as part of his research. On this day, his team is playing at Lourdes Cricket Ground, the Fenway Park or Wrigley Field of the sport.
The atmosphere of a cricket match, the way that which the game is played, the idea of the spirit of cricket, all of these are seen as symbolic of the English way of life.
Richard Murnane is a Lourdes tour guide.
This room is described as the Holy of Holies of cricket. It's the long room of the pavilion at Lords. Lords is the spiritual home of cricket, and this is the hub, the focal point of the pavilion.
The MCC, or Marylebone Cricket Club, founded in 1787, has played here in the St. John's Wood section of London since 1814. Back then, cricket was a game played by aristocrats and noblemen, a manly sport of the elite. As for how the sport began, or who invented it, no one really knows for sure.
It's believed that the game started in the early part of the last millennium as a fairly simple game played by shepherds. In the fields, I suppose, when they weren't tending their sheep, one of them would bowl a ball of wool at another shepherd who would defend a wicket gate, hence perhaps the word wicket, which is still in use in the game now, and he would defend it with his shepherd's crook.
The game's changed a lot in the last 1,000 years or so, but the basic premise hasn't.
In cricket, you bowl it, and baseball, you pitch it, throw it.
Both cricket and baseball are team games, but they centre around a duel between bat and ball, between a pitcher and a batter, or between a bowler and a batsman. So that's the sort of main psychological similarity that you're playing within a team, but each of the moments, each of the discrete moments in each sport take place between one man playing against another.
You've got that duel between a pitcher and a batter, or a bowler and a batsman in the case of cricket, which is somewhat, unique to these family of games.
The cricket swing isn't, I would hesitate to say contorted, but it's certainly restricted because of the ball bouncing. We try to keep the blade perpendicular for longer. As well, the baseball swing is a bit more natural. Like if you just threw up a ball and hit it with a stick, you'd probably do something a bit more like baseball than like cricket.
If cricket was so popular in England, why didn't it take hold the same way as baseball in the United States? Some historians point to the impact of the Civil War. Baseball was an easier pickup game for soldiers. It required less equipment than cricket and soon overshadowed it. Then there's another argument, one that goes deeper into the country's collective psyche.
Cricket was seen to be very English, and America at that time was really defining itself in terms of moving away from that very sort of parental link with Britain, and the sense was that you didn't need to be like an English person to define yourself as being a true American, or in actual fact, it helped not to be. So cricket in a way was yesterday's game, tainted almost by its Englishness and its class associations.
So which sport is better? Cricket!
Like all sort of proper cricket fans, as a kid, I always hated baseball because they were sort of the enemy, it was what we didn't think we were anything like baseball, which was a bit like rounders, so we sort of used to mock it, really. Also, it was pretty fashionable when we were at school to be a little bit anti-American, we sort of were a bit English and snobbish about the whole thing.
I'm personally very much captivated by this idea of the games almost having been separated at birth and being effectively two opposite sides of the same coin.
Both sports have a special place in the nation's hearts, or in the nation's consciousness even. They seem to have a stranglehold over the nation's memories and a sense of nostalgia, a sense of what it is to be American or what it is to be English.
The crew left Lord's Cricket Ground to head south of London into the countryside in search of other English bat and ball games related to baseball history.
If baseball and cricket are cousins, and baseball and rounders are siblings, there's no question about it.
The game itself, rounders, is the most played sport in the UK by schoolgirls, and 86% of schools in the UK play rounders, and that equates to 6 million pupils.
These students attend Malays, a secondary school in West Sussex.
Rounders is a team game, but you're basically in two teams, and you have to bat to get round, and if you get round all the posts, you score a rounder, and it's the objective fielding team to get you out, and then when all the batters are out, then you swap around.
It's a batting and striking game, as we refer to it over here, and the elements of that are very similar to cricket and baseball and softball.
In England, there's a long tradition of women playing bat and ball games, particularly baseball. In a letter written in 1748, Lady Hervey describes the co-ed activities of the family of Frederick, Prince of Wales, as diverting themselves with baseball. In the 1799 novel Battle Ridge, one of Cassandra Cook's characters exclaims, "Ah, no more cricket, no more baseball. They're sending me to Geneva." Mary Russell Mitford also makes mention of baseball several times in her novels. Mitford and Cook were both acquaintances of another English novelist who wrote about baseball, Jane Austen.
When the question was first put to me about Jane Austen referring to baseball, I thought, this really can't be so. Surely not, because in England at least, we think of baseball, at least today, as an entirely American major sport.
The connection between Austen and baseball was a surprise to the curator of Jane Austen's House Museum. But a reference is right there in the opening chapter of Northanger Abbey, which Austen finished writing in 1799.
It was not very wonderful that Catherine, who by nature had nothing heroic about her, should prefer cricket, baseball, riding on horseback, and running about the country at the age of 14 to books, or at least books of information.
Including the word baseball in fiction was pretty much of a rarity. So the fact that she mentioned one of her characters playing baseball really places it as a game that was played by young English women and English girls of the same social class that Jane Austen belonged to.
And it opened up the intriguing question, really, actually, did Jane Austen know much more about that as a game than we thought?
Like the baseball-playing heroine in Northanger Abbey over 2 centuries earlier, the Malay schoolgirls are enthusiastic ball players. And as much as baseball and rounders are similar, there are important distinctions, most significantly the field of play. In rounders, home plate isn't the scoring plate, that's fourth base, which is down the third base line. Also, a ball just has to be hit forward of the line, so there's more fair territory than baseball. And it has to be bowled underarm to a batter lower than the head and above the knee.
Rounders is a more gentle game. You're not running as far. You run 12 metres between bases as opposed to 30 metres in baseball, so you don't need such a high degree of skill and athleticism.
And of course, there's a relationship between rounders and baseball. How do you see it? Are you familiar with American baseball?
Yeah.
It seems relatively obvious that these two sports' origins must have crossed paths at some point. The mere fact that both make use of safe havens called bases speaks to that. But trying to trace baseball's roots opened up all sorts of new questions.
You can't really conclusively say this is how it happened, but year by year, as we learn more and find new evidence, we slowly start putting the jigsaw puzzle together and learn more about baseball's beginnings.
By traveling through the English countryside to see baseball's relatives in action, a clear picture of the game's ancestry was beginning to emerge. Then, suddenly the crew was thrust smack in the middle of the story when our visit caught the attention of a local news station.
They've been playing rounders in England for hundreds of years. It started actually as a sport called stool ball. But baseball has always been perceived as America's game. Nevertheless, the origins actually can be traced right back to here. And that's what's brought a documentary team from Major League Baseball here to the South. Now, perhaps you have some memories or some information on baseball being played here in the South which could help their research on the sport, or send us an email to the south.today@bbc.co.uk address. We'll pass it on.
I turned on the news and I saw this little item about baseball and American historians looking at the origins of baseball in England. And, you know, we knew about rounders and we knew about stool ball. And they said it references to it in Jane Austen's time in the 1790s. And I thought, but I know a reference to it much earlier than that. Maybe they'd be interested.
I was flabbergasted because, you know, you don't really expect something like that out of the blue. We bundled into the cars and drove out to the middle of nowhere to this little tiny village where this woman's 16th century cottage was.
In the town of Rudgwick, we found Tricia St. John Berry, owner of Little Vacherie. She's certainly not a baseball fan, but has always been fascinated by local Surrey history. When her neighbor mentioned a carton of old things in the garden shed that she was about to throw out, Berry went for a look and claimed to salvage an unpromising-looking manuscript.
So I got what I thought was a rough exercise book from a Victorian child. I thought it was Victorian writing. And I used to try to read it late at night because I was doing up this very old cottage and it was filthy and I was working hard. And when went into bed, I tried to read it, and I would then fling it to one side of the bed when I put the light out, and the dogs might well have been lying on it.
The first thing that happened when she answered the door was, "I can't find it." She was mortified.
I've always been interested in history, interested in doing up old houses, interested in gardens, but not very good at finding things.
Barry described transcribing the journal onto her computer, but the actual manuscript was nowhere to be found. Plus, the relevant files on her hard drive were old and inconclusive. The crew was left wondering, did this former actress simply have an active imagination? Was it a hoax? Would the journal turn up eventually?
Reports about early baseball turn out to be false positives. They're more, it's really stool ball or it's some other traditional game they're talking about, and not baseball.
So odds were Barry was well-intentioned but mistaken. The crew left Sussex to continue the search for baseball's true origins in nearby Kent County, where one ancient game managed to combine the enjoyment of playing sports with the fun of watching it at the same time. Canterbury is famous because of Chaucer's 14th century magnum opus, The Canterbury Tales, and its prominence in the Church of England. Few know this region is also home to a sport with deep ties to baseball, a game known as bat and trap. The most astounding thing about bat and trap, which dates back as early as the 14th century, is that it's still being played today in English pubs, only now it's organized in league play.
First ball of the season, boys.
And this pub is the Red Lion. The significance to the league is the very fact that it's the only pub in the league which has 3 pitches.
Whoa!
The pub is central. It's where you go on a Friday evening very often. I think it's the same in the States. Friday evening, all the men will go to the local pub straight from work, 6 o'clock, spend an hour or so talking to everybody, catching up on what's going on, and so on. Bat and trap is the same. It is based totally on the pubs.
OK, so far our side has got about 40 runs, and this is our last batsman batting now. Unfortunately, only one of our team has actually got any runs, and the rest of us have been pretty rubbish.
The basic premise of the game, like baseball, is to score more runs than the other side. But there's no pitcher throwing the ball. Instead, batsmen strike the ball off a wooden trap.
The bat and trap ball is a completely moulded ball, and it's heavy, and it's made of rubber. It's unlike the cricket ball or the baseball ball, which have seams. So it's a complete ball. That allows it to be propelled along the grass, to go towards the trap and pick up any of the bumps in the grass, or even to get a curl on it.
In bat and trap, nobody actually runs. Runs are scored by hitting the ball from the batting end between 2 posts. A bowler from the opposite team can get a batter out by bowling the ball toward the front of the trap to knock down a flap. Once all the players on a team are out, then the other side gets a chance to score runs. One side's turn is called one leg, or an innings, and a full game consists of the best out of the 3 innings.
So it's the best of 3 legs. If we win
If you win the next leg, do you play
it's
a
all
third
over.
leg?
If we win this leg, we've won. And if we lose this leg, we now got to play a 3rd leg decider.
Okay.
So it's best of 3.
The prime similarity between baseball is probably on the rules of 3 strikes. Is the obvious one in bat and trap. A batsman is allowed to strike the trap to release the ball. If he's not happy with the way the ball's come out of the trap, then he can leave it alone. Provided he doesn't swing at it, he's okay to have another go. That can happen twice. On the 3rd attempt at releasing the ball, he must attempt to strike the ball down the pitch and between the posts. If he doesn't do that, then he's had his 3 strikes and he's out.
This game had distinct boundaries that you had to hit the ball within, and if it went beyond those boundaries, it wasn't a fair ball. And that's something that we have in baseball, and this is the only game that's older than baseball that has that concept, and I'm pretty sure that this is where it came from.
You shouldn't knock out, really. You should always be able to get it down there between the two sticks.
I mean, that's the beautiful thing about it. Bat and trap is a game for people who aren't athletes, you know, who like to drink, quite like to be out in the open air, and like to be able to bowl with one hand and have a pint of beer in the other at the same time. I mean, you are in a pub, let's remember.
You're going to take aim and fire.
Hey, Ricky. Oh, that was...
Hang on, we kick it. Oh, that was close.
The States, a bar is a place to go and get drunk, whereas here a bar is a place to go and get drunk in front of your family.
Oh dear.
We've got a rule book that thick. It's incredible. But we do our level best to take no notice of it if we possibly can.
Oh yes.
Oh, yes.
Oh! They can do this in their sleep.
Somebody said, you know, bat and trap now can be described as 16 guys standing around and holding beers. And you sort of see it.
Come on, you campuses!
As far as we can make out, they all have some sort of a common origin. Sometimes it's only a change in the name of the game. You know, you look at it and you suddenly realise it's exactly the same game.
Is that bloody number 2, isn't it? Yeah.
Baseball somehow made it to the New World. I don't think it was actually invented in the States. They do have a common ancestry, but if somebody said, where did these two things diverge? Not really easy to say.
It's certainly a distant relative, and it's probably a distant relative of quite a few games involving a bat and ball throughout the world. Pretty much like a great aunt or a great uncle, I would have thought.
From the Red Lion pub, travel 73 miles southwest and you get closer to the heart of where the love affair with baseball first began. This is Horsham, in West Sussex. The town's history dates back to at least 947 AD, and sometime in the Middle Ages, people in this market town became passionate about a certain bat and ball game.
The oldest of the ball games and the mother of all ball games in Western civilization is stool ball.
Will you go with me? What shall we do there, wench? Why? Play at stool ball.
It's played by both young men and young women. It was associated with springtime courtship rituals, a series of stools set up either in a triangle or in a square or diamond fashion. Somebody trying to hit a stool with the ball and another player trying to defend the stool with their hand or with a stick, and then after doing so, starting to run from stool to stool.
There is this element of courtship, of fertility rites and Easter and this sort of thing. It was the forerunner, I think, of today's kids going to the local cafe, meeting up, having a Coke or whatever it may be.
It's thought that the game of stool ball originated thanks to a different beverage, milk. During a break from milking cows, milkmaids would turn a stool upside down to create a sort of wicket.
What that game looked like, in a sense, is anybody's guess.
John Price and his wife Kay both grew up playing stool ball in Horsham. A popular site for co-ed pickup games was the local churchyard, where the gate would serve as a wicket.
People were fined for playing stool ball on a Sunday. When I first started playing, if you played on a Sunday, you had to be off the ground by 6 o'clock. Directly the church bells started ringing for evensong on a Sunday evening, you had to stop playing.
There are amorous connections in what went on with stool ball and in the churchyard. I don't want to make it sound a smutty game, but, you know, the girls and the boys were showing some sort of athleticism is a feature today that is still attractive one sex to the other.
It's like all the other sports, you know, they always start off way back, and I don't know originally where it started off from.
You just grow into them when you're at school, don't you?
Yes.
From the elder.
I found indications that women were playing in groups as early as the early 19th century, the early 1800s.
We used to play against various other local schools, which was very challenging, and we was always very, very good.
And we always won?
Yes, always.
Like baseball, the stool ball season runs from spring to fall. It's almost entirely a woman's game now, played in the evening after work. This is a Sussex County West Division League match. Horsham Trinity is in white and black. Angmering, a perennial powerhouse, in the royal blue and canary yellow.
we are technically very good. Some teams will be submissive and give in before they start. Other teams will take us on. It's not dominated by men, so women get their chance to shine, really.
I've been playing with my daughter, and at times I've actually been batting with my daughter, which has been quite amusing.
Quite often you'll have batsmen in the family, so if your mother's a batsman, then you progress to be a batsman. If your mother's a bowler, then you grow up being a bowler, and you tend to take on the mannerisms of your mother as well.
And I saw you on the field, and I said, this proves the connection between baseball and school.
The connection is my son plays for
the junior baseball.
in the junior baseball,
Yeah,
and
we
he
were
plays
there
for the
yesterday.
athletics.
It's very similar to cricket, except it's a lot faster. In the course of an evening game, you can score 400 or 500 runs.
After the Angmarine Club won the match, the two teams, as is the custom, had tea together. Soon it was time for the crew to leave Horsham and head back to the States, knowing more about baseball's origins than before, yet still wondering if there was more to learn.
As an early baseball historian, I often fantasize about making some great discovery that would completely prove definitively the origins of baseball. Unfortunately, I don't think that particular fantasy is going to be realized, but it's nice to think about every once in a while.
First message. Sam, this is Tricia St. John Barry. You'll be relieved to hear I found the Bray Diary. I look forward to hearing from you.
Now, a couple of weeks ago, we featured a story about baseball. Tony Husband, you may recall, met an American documentary team who were investigating their sports roots here in the South. Well, one South Today viewer contacted us about an old document. Today, intrigued, of course, the Americans came back.
And this time Barry had the journal. It turns out it was the diary of William Bray, a Surrey lawyer and an antiquarian who kept meticulous journals through his long life.
I just knew that it would be important to Americans because baseball is very important to Americans. Well, to all the Americans I've ever met, anyway.
Somehow this volume had been separated from the rest of his archive and was unknown to historians. It contains one of the earliest known references to the game ever found, from 1755. On Monday, March 31st, Easter Monday, he made this entry when he was 18 or 19 years old.
Went to Stoke Church this morning. After dinner, went to Miss Seald's to play at baseball with her, the three Miss Whiteheads, Miss Billingshurst, Miss Molly Flutter, Mr. Chandler, Mr. Ford, and H. Parsons. Drank tea and stayed till 8.
The word just jumps off
Leaps
the
out
page,
at you,
doesn't it?
because I wonder if he'd ever heard of it before and wondered how it had to be spelt and has asked someone and put it in later. I said, I'm sure Americans would be interested in this.
Well, we are. We are, I can assure you.
I just didn't know how interested you would be.
This 1755 diary entry is the oldest known original manuscript in the world referencing baseball.
His handwriting suggests that he's written the word baseball particularly carefully. He's interested in the word. It may have been the first time that he'd played it. On other occasions, when he's playing other games, he's not writing those in any particular way. But in this entry, baseball is written in a very clear hand to emphasise its difference from other things. I find that quite striking.
The fact that it was played by both men and women tells us exactly that it wasn't gender specific, that it was for both sexes at that time. And so each little bit of information like this helps us fill in our picture and our understanding of what baseball was like during that era.
Well, William Bray would have been, I think, highly amused and very pleased to hear that he had made a contribution to the discovery of baseball history, because he was into everything that was new in his time. He was going to lectures on physics, he was playing at quadrille, he was playing cricket, he was going fishing. Did I say that already? I've forgotten. But he's just interested in everything.
From an unassuming Sussex garden shed springs images of baseball played centuries ago. It is simple fact that baseball has English roots, but not because some holy grail of the game exists here. Rather, the truth is revealed by seeing all the footprints in time and noting the important route markers along the way.
Coming over here and seeing some of these games that I had written about and read about in 200 and 300-year-old texts, it was just amazing to see them played live. It just gave so much personality. They definitely evoke the same kind of feeling that you get, say, when you walk out, in Wrigley Field or Fenway Park with a beautiful green grass. You can just say, well, this is just an ancient version of what we know as baseball.
It connects you to a part of America that we thought was earlier than baseball. It turns out, instead, that baseball is earlier than America.
Baseball, or any other sport of its kind, comes alive once the ball is hit. No one ever really knows where it's going to land. It's the nature of the game to embark on an indeterminate journey.
It's very important for us to get it right, to get every story about baseball right, especially the origin story. Doubleday was not the inventor of the game.
I think Americans are a little bit more understanding today. I mean, they may say, well, it comes from a British girls' game, but hey, look what we've done with it. I mean, it's almost like these British people didn't realize what they had, and they let it sit around in the attic without doing anything with it.
Today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth.
In many ways, the question is one of semantics. When did baseball become baseball?
Baseball is indeed changing all the time.
There's a new home run champion of all time!
Even when the changes seem barely perceptible and require fairly sophisticated analysis to convince the average fan that the ball game on the field in the 21st century is significantly different from that of even the 1980s.
In a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened.
It's almost like an adopted child. Baseball is very much an American game. The fact that it may have had English origins is really beside the point. The point is that it grew up in the States. It's embraced by people in the States as their game.
Yet addressing nature versus nurture has meaning, because the truth is, by understanding both, we get closer to knowing why we play and how the games began.
The wisdom of our elders, or the tragedy of the fall, is its expulsion from the womb. This is what the fall is. So that when you're playing catch, what you're doing is you are remedying the fall from grace, and when you're playing catch, you're not so lonely anymore.
To throw, catch, hit, all such simple acts. Child's play on any continent.
Anyone who's watched children play on the street. I was just talking to another chap from New York, and we were talking about stickball. He had 3 variations of stickball that he played in his neighborhood, and I had 3 variations of stickball that I played in my neighborhood, and they all were meant to fit what was available.
And I read some of these primitive rules and descriptions that appeared in children's books in the early 19th century. And when I'm looking at the modern game, sometimes I just flash on those simpler images and those playground scenes of kids playing baseball long before it was America's game. Would it be any different if it was a game that somebody had sat down and invented like James Naismith did with basketball? I don't know. I can't really answer the question. I just know for me, it seems completely rooted in history and play and enjoyment that children participated in for many, many decades and centuries.
The ball once struck off, away flies the boy to the next destined post and then home with joy.